This is the Rich Dad Radio Show, the good news and bad news about money. Here's Robert Kiyosaki.
Hello. It's Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Radio Show, the good news and bad news about money. And today we have some really great news. So stay tuned. It's really about what Kim and I designed the cash flow board game about. Is how to get out of the rat race of life and get on with your life. So anyway, we have a very important show for those who have played the cash flow game. I suggest you play it if you haven't played it. And it's about getting out of the rat race or the middle class trap of go to school, get a job, work hard, save money, invest in a 401k, and get out of debt. I mean, that's really a sucker's play there. So our guest today is the infamous Clayton Morris. He's a former weekend anchor for Fox and Friends and the Fox News Channel. And I just can't believe what he just did. He resigned from one of the most prestigious positions in television to get on with his life's dream. He's out of the rat race and doing what he really is passionate about doing. So you're going to hear his story of how he got out of the rat race. But man, if I was in New York on Fox every morning, I would be in heaven. But apparently he's got other plans, and God or the Great Spirit has other bigger plans for Clayton to serve his fellow human beings. And in the studio today is our partner, Ken McElroy. He is the expert on real estate. He owes everything to Kim and I because we taught him. I taught him everything I know, but he's so ungrateful. Now, Kenny and I have gone on. I mean, after Kim and I became financially free, Kenny took us to the next level of financial freedom. I mean, there's so much money coming in if you know what you're doing. And my sweetheart, Kim. What do you want to say, Kim?
Well, this is going to be a great show because if you've ever thought, if you're working 9 to 5, 5 days a week or more, and you have this dream of something you want to do, but you're afraid to give up the paycheck. You're afraid, you have a lot of excuses. Well, fame, if you have fame, but if I've got a spouse and kids, I can't do that, and all of the excuses that come with it. Well, here's a guy who was, as you said, Robert, the celebrity, kind of living the dream, and he had something else that was driving him, and he was passionate about, and he took this incredible leap of faith. We're going to hear his story, and I think it's the perfect rich dad story. So I'm excited.
And Clayton Morris is a dear friend of the family here. He's always got us onto Fox and Friends to pitch our story about finance and different ways of looking at financial freedom. So Clayton was instrumental for us getting publicity we might never have gotten. So anyway, welcome to the program, Clayton.
Oh, thank you guys so much. You're too kind. Thank you guys for having me here. This is a true honor.
Yeah.
It's our honor.
So Kenny, what do you want to say? What do you want to say about freedom via real estate?
Well, first of all, I commend Clayton. I think it takes tremendous courage. There's a lot of stuff that goes on when you take this leap. A family, friends, all basically saying, "What are you doing?" I mean, that's a big piece. And I'm sure we'll hear a little bit about that. But Clayton, as you know, we've met. I've been on your show, and I'm very happy for you, and I can't wait to help if I can and assist.
I wouldn't accept it.
Yeah.
Hey, I will accept. I absolutely accept it. I mean, you guys, and I don't say this lightly. I mean, I really the reason for the reframing that led to me leaving, that started this sort of journey 10 years ago, all started with you guys. I mean, without a doubt, this is not blown smoke at all. It really was that reframing, realizing that when I lost my job in Philadelphia, like 10 years ago, I was hired as the morning anchor for Good Day Philadelphia, and they encouraged me to buy a house in Philly, come live there back in my hometown. Great. And I get there, and a week later, my news director gets fired.
Jeez.
She had hired me to make the morning show fun and hip and young, and she gets fired. And so I had no internal support. Then a week later, they hire a new news director. This guy just wants, murder off the top of the show and really, horrible news stories leading every hour.
You mean
that wasn't
CNN,
me.
right? Continuous negative news.
Exactly, nonstop negativity, and I didn't want that in the morning. Who wants to have that over their Cheerios? And so about 8 months into my contract, when my option was open to renew, they just said, we're not going to renew your contract. And it was like I was 12 years old again, watching my dad lose his job. Really the poor dad way of looking at wealth building. He was so angry and scared, and I just went back to being that angry and scared kid again. And I said, you know what? Never again. Never again am I going to be beholden to what somebody else tells me, decides to renew a contract for me or not. I'm going to start now trying to figure this out. And that's when I started learning the ways that you guys teach.
Well, sometimes, something bad is the best thing that ever happens to you because, Kim and I have a very similar story. Both our fathers lost their jobs mid-career. And that's why we became entrepreneurs. This idea of go to school and get a job and, climb the corporate ladder was just, having our fathers unemployed kind of sours you, right, Kim?
Yeah, it did. And on top of that, Clayton, very similar to you, my first job out of college, after about 9 months, I got fired. And it was the best thing that could have happened to me because it was my wake-up call saying, you really do hate being told what to do, Kim. So let's face that fact and move on.
So, Clayton, would you mind giving us a little of your background, where you're from and all this, how you got into, the rarefied world of, television, national television?
Well, I thought it was my dream, and it really was my dream in broadcast. As a child, I used to sneak downstairs when my parents thought I was asleep, and I would watch Letterman, and I'd watch Carson, and my parents would come down and yell at me. And so I loved the medium of broadcasting.
Where was this? Where'd you grow up?
I was born outside of Philadelphia, so in the city, and then we moved out to Cherry Hill, New Jersey, and then into Reading, Pennsylvania. So I spent my high school years and junior high and elementary in Reading, Pennsylvania. Home on the Reading Railroad on the Monopoly board, but we never saw a train come through Reading. So we're like, what's going on here? This terrible infrastructure for trains in this country, and there's nothing here. So that was the city, and I grew up just having these dreams of doing television, and I would do stand-up comedy when I was 15 years old at the local comedy clubs, and
jeez,
and
that's
went
tough.
off to the University of Pittsburgh.
That's great training. Wow.
Oh, yeah, when you realize that you're going to do this 360 days a year, traveling all over the country, sleeping in, till noon, and then just going to sleep at 3 at night, and you're doing the same stuff, it's a hard road. And so, but I knew, I didn't know what I didn't know, and I moved to Los Angeles after college and just started as a production assistant working for a Fox affiliate out there in Los Angeles at KTTV in West L.A. That was my first production job, and they said, if you want to get on the air, you've got to leave. So that was 1999. And I went and became a political reporter up in Montana, covering the governor there, and then all over the country as a news anchor, rising up through the ranks. And, your goal, of course, is then to get to a network, and I was blessed then after losing my job in Philadelphia that the network called and said, hey, we'd love for you to come up to New York. We've got an opening on Fox and Friends. We think you'd be great. And I said, but wait a minute, you guys just fired me. And I said, no, there's a big separation between church and state. That's a local affiliate. It has nothing to do with the network. Come on up and meet with us. We've been following your career for a number of years. And I was just like, mouth dropped. What are you talking about? You've been following me, And then they were kind enough, and I never looked back in 10 years getting to host the number one show in cable news. So,
but in the back of your mind, you said after you lost your job, it says, well, thank you. You've done me a favor. Because I'm not going to get sucked into the trap, or however you phrase it.
And I don't know if you guys went through this. I don't know. We can do a round robin here, but I don't know. Like Kim, you mentioned it was the best thing it could have happened. It's like I don't know that I knew it at the time. I went on antidepressants.
Yeah, I didn't know it at the time. No, I didn't know it at the time. Yeah, it's devastating when it happens.
Kenny still hasn't found a job, so he doesn't know what it's like. So.
I didn't know what to make of it. I was really terrified, and I went back to because I grew up with a lot of fears around money. In my house, I would hear, money doesn't grow on trees. We're not the Rockefellers. We can't afford that. So that's really the mantra, in our company, and what I talk about on the podcast is really be aware of how you're talking to your children about money. And I'm so glad what you guys do.
So Clayton, the whole time that you were with Fox and Friends, you were also on this other path, correct? building your wealth, or if you knew that there was something else you were going to be doing, or?
Yeah, and I lived all over the country, so I saw I was always paying a landlord to live where I was living, but I didn't quite understand it. I was mysteriously mailing off $500 a month to some landlord that I never saw to live in these different places. And finally, before I ever got to Philly, I tried to do a few flips in Florida, where I moved, and I had bought a single-family condo and a one-bedroom condo, and I lived in it and did the work on it myself. And an off-market property next door opened up, and at night, after waking up at 2 a.m. and doing my morning show that I was working on, I'd come home and I'd do drywall, and I didn't even know what I was doing. I was covered in spackle. I had no idea, and I flipped these 2 properties and made a good sum of money, but I didn't really know what I was doing. And then I got hit with the crunch of the market, then everything collapsed. And I had taken some of that profit, put it into some speculative land projects in Florida and North Carolina, and I lost everything. I mean, I lost all of that profit.
Welcome to the club.
And, yeah. And so I didn't realize it at the time. I mean, I just said, I'm not doing this for a while. I got to figure something out, until I realized the power of buy and hold real estate. And so when I was at Fox and Friends, I was still going through this foreclosure. I got a call I went to buy a cup of coffee, and I couldn't even buy a cup of coffee. All of my bank accounts were frozen.
Wow. Because
I had gone through a deficiency judgment on this one property. Oh, it was just the hardest. I was on antidepressants. I couldn't even buy a cup of coffee, and everything seemed like it was collapsing around me. And I said, I've got to figure this out.
You listen to Rich Dad Radio. Our guest today is Clayton Morris. He's on Fox and Friends. And we're talking about what it takes to get out of the rat race and get on with your life. That's what we're talking about. It's all you right there saying, well, I'm stuck in a job, and there's no money, and I can't do anything, and all this. Well, that's what the Rich Dad Company was founded for. That's why Kim and I created the Cash Flow board game in 1996, is how to get out of the rat race. Because I seriously doubt if you can get out of the rat race with a 401k, especially when the market's set to crash again. Markets always crash. 401ks have no insurance on them, and there's a lot of guys my age, baby boomers, who will, be smelling the coffee in a little while. So that's why I have Clayton Morris on the program. We have Ken McElroy, who's a Rich Dad advisor on real estate, founder of MC Companies. He's the author of the ABCs of Real Estate Investing, the ABCs of Property Management, which is the most important of all the books, and the Advanced Guide to Real Estate Investment, which is the advanced finance part of it, and my sweetheart, Kim. So, Clayton, we're just talking to Clayton. Congratulations on getting out of the rat race. And everybody thinks it's going to be easy. And I thank you for your candor and saying what it feels like to not be able to buy a cup of coffee, because Kim and I have been there. I remember when we first were together, we couldn't even check into the Red
Roof Inn or the Sixpence Motel.
The Sixpence. We had no
nothing.
money. My credit card was so hot. And then we went and bought a bucket of Colonel Sanders fried chicken, a 6-pack of Bud, and we were in heaven.
That was the time where they didn't have digital cards. They physically swiped them. It wasn't electronic. So
and the machine didn't work, so we were in.
Yes. So they swiped it. That's the only way we got a room. I'm like,
you're still paying that. You're still paying for that chicken today.
Yes, we are.
No, we got wanted posters out for us. Chicken thieves. So anyway, for all of you out there who just think that, well, I'm going to go out and buy a couple of duplexes and become financially free, this is your program. But also to encourage you. Freedom is far more important than being a slave to a paycheck.
You're listening to the Rich Dad Radio Show with Robert Kiyosaki.
Robert Kiyosaki's Rich Dad Advisors have a great gift for you. Visit richdadadvisors.com and receive 5 free reports on business and investing success. 5 free reports that can help you right now. And while there, check out the Author's Choice audio series. Audio is a great way to learn. And for as little as 99 cents, you can download key chapters from all the Rich Dad Advisor books. You can listen to The Myths and Magic of Real Estate Investing, 7 Steps to Limited Liability, The 4 Pillars of Investing, Team Code of Honor, or The Psychology of Debt, among other great audios. For pennies, you can power up your skills for getting out of the rat race. So please visit richdadadvisors.com for your 5 free reports and your powerful and affordable audio chapters. That's richdadadvisors.com for great information that can help you right now.
Your financial education continues. Now back to Robert Kiyosaki and the Rich Dad Radio Show.
Welcome back, Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Radio Show. And for those may or may not know it, is that when I came to the end of the line, I was in rock and roll. And I met Kim, and I said, I can't do this anymore. I can't just get up every morning just to make money. And there's more to life than that. So this was about 84, right?
Yep.
And our first date was to the police concert. And I said, I'm out of here. You know, I don't know what I'm going to do, but I can't keep doing what I'm doing. So remember those days, Kim?
Oh, I'll never forget those days. And we that was our first leap of faith. We've taken a lot of leaps of faith, but that
Right.
was our first leap of faith.
And I think that's why most people don't make it, is because they just stand at the edge and never look down but never take the leap. So, Kenny, when did you hit the end of the line?
Well, multiple times, really. I mean, after college.
It's part of being an entrepreneur, isn't
yeah,
it?
after my first job. You know, I've had, as you know, my very
And
first...
Kenny, just to jump in here, Kenny is our Rich Dad advisor on real estate, and he is the author of ABCs of Real Estate Investing, ABCs of Property Management, and the Advanced Guide to Real Estate, and he's the founder of MC Companies.
So let's introduce Clayton one more time. It's Clayton Morris. He's a former weekend anchor at Fox & Friends on the Fox News Network, and he has transitioned to a real estate investor.
Recently,
a
recently.
month ago.
Yeah.
And founder of Morris Invest. His website is ClaytonMorris.com, one word, ClaytonMorris.com, and MorrisInvest.com. And is the most important thing about Clayton, he's doing it not just to make money, but to make sure other people who are in financial dire straits have a shot at the future.
So, Clayton, let me ask you, you were saying you had just started at Fox & Friends. You know, your accounts were all blinking red because they were all frozen. You couldn't buy a cup of coffee. At that time, most people would quit. What kept you going?
First of all, I was young, and I vowed somehow along the way to not repeat what I had witnessed my father go through, which was losing his job and being beholden to this paycheck. And he always, as he got older and people wouldn't hire him anymore, and he was, living off of Social Security, and he had no real wealth to show. And we had a great family, we had a great life, but he didn't have that legacy wealth that I know that he yearned for. I mean, he had just his bookshelves were lined with business books, and he just couldn't push through it. And I just said I'm breaking that cycle. I'm going to do it. I didn't just drop what I was doing after college and move to Los Angeles to try to make my way in television and not figure this out. But again, I was still working a transactional job, right? I'm still getting a paycheck at Fox. So everyone thinks it's so exclusive, it's prestigious, and it certainly was. But at the end of the day, you can still be ruled by fear even there, right? Because what happens if your contract is not renewed? Sure. What happens if they decide they want somebody younger, more handsome? I know that would be impossible.
I was going to say, you're pretty handsome.
But how I pushed through, it was an amazing morning because I just sat back and I just took a deep breath. And it was probably one of the clearest moments I've had, and now later in my life in meditation. But at the time, I just took a deep breath and I said, you know what? It only goes up from here. And I just started to figure out what went wrong. How could I unfreeze one particular account? And I couldn't. My credit was destroyed, everything. So I had to start finding creative ways, like Ken talks about, to find real estate deals. And that's when it all opened up for me. It was sort of forced because I couldn't go to a bank and get a loan. I couldn't, use my credit to just go out and get a mortgage and buy a property. I had to figure out how do I find great off-market deals.
I want everybody to hear what Clayton just said. Kim, we've been there, right? Where we had nothing.
When we started, we had no money. When we started investing in real estate, we had no money. We had no credit.
Nobody would give us anything.
No, we couldn't go to a bank either.
Yep, you have to see what no one else sees.
Yeah.
But have you been there too?
Oh my gosh, yes, of course. I mean, we all have, and I think it's a good part of the process.
And I think that's the reason most people are not successful is when
They're
somebody,
afraid of that.
the banker says, no, I can't find a deal. They quit. I mean, they're just a bunch of losers.
But Clayton said it really well. He said it forced him to get very creative.
Yes, that's the difference.
And for us, it forced us to get so creative. We still use a lot of the things that we learned back then.
We don't let stop us. We just find a different way of going around
Not
it,
having the money actually was a benefit because it forced us to think.
And Clayton, I was, poor Kim, every time she showed my financial, I was down by then about $800,000. And the banker says, that wasn't blinking red. It says, you're dead. I mean, how are you going to pay this $800,000 off,
Anyone can do it. I can do it. Kim and Robert can do it. Anybody can do it.
No, Robert can't do it.
Don't give away my trade secret. No, I owe everything to Kim and Kenny. That's just how it is. But anyway, I was just reading. Somebody just sent me this video, and it says why valedictorians don't make it. And it's the reason why valedictorians, they're 4.0 students, 4.0 GPAs, is because they follow the rules. And he said most entrepreneurs, the rich ones, have a 2.95 GPA. And I texted, it was Shane Coniglia, our president. I texted him back, says, well, that's why I'm so rich, because I had a 2.01. I just almost flunked out again,
It's resilience.
Yeah.
That's what it is.
The article says it's called grit. It's just grit.
I read that book. It's a great book.
Yeah, it's just grit. And I think if all of you listening right now, if you don't have that grit, keep your daytime job or do some meditation or prayer or whatever it takes, find counseling. But it's really a spiritual journey. And if you think it's going to be, one nice and easy road, I think you're in dreamland. Right, Kenny?
Well, I think it also spills over into other things. It spills over into relationships with your employees, with your family, with money, with everybody, and your friends, and
well, let's talk about that because Clayton, what happened with you have 2 kids, young kids, right, and your wife and your family and friends. What were their reactions to what you were doing?
Well, it was interesting because as I started on this journey, I started saving this money that I had no way else of getting money, so I was just putting some of my own money aside, and we were still struggling. I was making good money, and I went out and I found 2 properties, and I started getting these properties cash flowing. And I said, I'm going to do this. And it all started. I was on a flight to New Zealand. I was going to visit a friend of mine, and I was going to be there for 5 days. That's all I could go for because I had a paycheck job. And I'm there after 16 hours on this flight. There's a couple sitting next to me in their 50s. We got talking, and I said, how long are you going to be in New Zealand? They said 2 months. And I said, 2 months? Who gets to go to New Zealand for 2 months? And he looked at me and said, I'm a real estate investor. And I said, oh, interesting. And I said, I just got out my pen, and I said, okay, I'm ready. Just fill up my glass.
Very smart.
Good for you.
Very smart.
That's the other thing. It takes grit. The second word is humility. Can you ask somebody to tell you something that, to say, I don't know something, tell me. Humility, grit, and perseverance, man, that's what it takes. There's a lot of humility.
He told me where he was buying properties, and I just said, great. So I got back a week later, and I went and I bought 2 properties, and they've been great properties for me ever since, cash flowing. But my wife, I didn't quite get it. I didn't quite tap into, the rich dad philosophy. I hadn't fully figured it out yet, And my wife comes to me in the basement in my office, and she says, we can't pay the mortgage this month. And I said, what? Here I am, a Fox News anchor, and I had to go through my closet and try to sell stuff out of my closet, like some jeans and an old camera, and we barely were able to pay our mortgage that month. And I said, something's got to change. I said, honey, wait a second. And over a 3-hour span of time, over a bottle of wine, kids in bed, I said, we have these 2 properties. They've been cash flowing for us $800 a month consistently. We paid, we're $30,000, $40,000 for them. There have been gems. How can we take what our monthly expenses and reverse engineer that? How many of these properties would it take for me to be financially free and where I don't have to sit here and cry because I can't pay my mortgage and support my 3 kids? And that's when I came up with the idea for our freedom number. And that once my wife was able to see that, Kim, to answer your question, then we start sharing that with our family and friends. We're like, we're going to hit financial freedom. And then, Robert, to your point earlier, that's when I made the plan that I said, I'm going to be financially free by the time I'm 42 years old. I'm going to quit my job. and I beat it by 2 years. I just turned 40.
Congratulations.
Fantastic.
Congratulations. Once again, it's Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Radio Show, the good news and bad news about money. You can listen to this program anytime, anywhere on iTunes or Android. And all of our programs are archived at richdadradio.com. We archive them because anything worth listening to is worth listening to again. And you can, listen to this program, share it with friends, family, and business associates, because I think what Clayton is saying is a message of the times, especially of these times, and for everybody to hear. Our guests are Clayton Morris. He's a former weekend anchor for Fox and Friends, and he talks about how he gave up a very prestigious, glamorous job in many ways to go for his dreams, become a real estate investor, founder of Morris Invest, and now he's sharing what he knows. He's teaching other people to find freedom. His website is claytonmorris.com and morrisinvest.com. Our other guest is Ken McElroy, Rich Dad Advisor on real estate and founder of MC Companies. And all kidding aside, I think Kenny is one of the most brilliant real estate investors in the world today. I've never met anybody, plus his partner, Ross McAllister, how they do what they do is magical. And these websites are mccompanies.com, mccompanies.com. So when we come up, we'll find out what Clayton is investing in and how he got to that magic number of freedom. And for those who have played the cash flow game, it's called when you have more passive income than your
Living expenses.
and that's when you're free.
You're listening to the Rich Dad Radio Show with Robert Kiyosaki.
Do you own an LLC or LP? Are you aware of the new rules? The IRS has mandated new audit rules that require every LLC operating agreement and LP limited partnership agreement be amended. This dramatic requirement has never before been experienced, and changes must be made by December 31st. Corporate Direct, owned by Rich Dad Advisor Garrett Sutton, can guide you through these new rules. Call 800-600-1760. That's 800-600-1760. Or visit corporatedirect.com. Contact Corporate Direct today to stay in IRS compliance.
This is the Rich Dad Radio Show, the good news and bad news about money. Here's Robert Kiyosaki.
Welcome back, Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Radio Show, the good news and bad news about money. And as I said, when I met Kim, I was in that business of rock and roll. It was a lot of fun, but one day I woke up and I said, what the hell am I doing with my life? I'm just out there making money. I don't do drugs, but I was trying to have some sex, but I was doing pretty good. And it was a lot of fun, but one day it was about time to get on with my life. And immediately when I sold my company and I was moving, I don't know where I was moving to, but I just knew I had to get out of Hawaii. It was too confining. And then I met the sweetheart named Kim. And I really do believe God sent her to me, because I was going to be stupid enough to go do something really stupid. But I'm pretty certain if I hadn't done that, we wouldn't be together today. Right, Kim?
No, it's interesting. You had your aha moment, and probably 2 months before I met you, I had the same thought that I go to work every day and I get a paycheck and I pay my bills and I go to work and I get a paycheck and I remember I was in Hawaii and I wake up one morning and I'm like, there's got to be more to life than this. And I started searching, but I didn't know what I was searching for. And on our very first date, Robert, you asked me, "What's your life's purpose?" And I'm like, "My what? My what?" And I'm like, I think this is part of the search. So it was destined to be.
And I can't say I knew what my life purpose was or is and all this, but I could see this crisis that we're in coming, because I was a student of Buckminster Fuller for 3 summers. He's a futurist. And for those who listen to Rich Dad Radio, we've had James Rickards on, and I think he's the futurist of today. He is the guy. So we're talking today to Clayton Morris, former weekend anchor of Fox and Friends, and he too had his light go on, and he says, what am I doing? It's not just about being glamorous and attractive on television. There's other things that God sent me to do here. So once he became financially free, which is the rich dad model of getting out of the rat race, he could get on with his life, and now he's kind of joined us in his way of teaching people what freedom is really about. It's not a job, a paycheck, and a 401k and getting out of debt, because that's not it. Our other guest is Ken McElroy. He's the Rich Dad Advisor on real estate, founder of MC Companies, author of the ABCs of Real Estate Investing. If you're ever thinking about real estate, start with that book. The second book in the series is ABCs of Property Management, which is the Bible. And once you get those two down, then you go to the Advanced Guide to Real Estate Investing. And Kim and I will attest that Advanced Guide to Real Estate Investing we were rich
really
before,
works.
but really made us really, really rich. So that's the best book of all.
A lot of people want to jump to the Advanced Guide, right? They want to start there without having any experience or knowledge or expertise starting at the beginning.
Yeah, excuse me, I have a chest cold. And Kenny's website is mccompanies.com. And so we're talking to Clayton about freedom, and the Rich Dad game about freedom is the number. And the number is, let's say you have expenses of $1,000 a month. When you have passive income from whatever it is, and generally it's real estate or a business that you don't work in, then that 1,000 negates the 1,000 expenses, and you're out of the rat race, you're free. And as Clayton says, you can go do what you really want to do. What do you have to say about that, Kenny?
Well, that is basically why you play the cash flow game. You know, it's it's essentially that. So,
but there's a lot to learn besides just playing the cash flow game too, right? You know?
Correct. Well, that's why I like the cash flow game, because it has all the things in it, and essentially it all rolls up to what is your freedom number, and that's why I like Clayton's message about that number, because I don't think a lot of people really know what their number is.
No, I don't think people know what their monthly expenses are.
Right.
I don't think they do.
Right.
So if you can solve to that, boy, just like he did in the basement, boy, what a nice thing to work on.
Most people don't tell themselves the truth about how much they spend. And we had early days, we had Betty the bookkeeper. And the reason we had Betty the bookkeeper is because she would sit us down and say, you have this much going out, but you only have this much coming in. And she forced us to get very honest about how much money we were spending every single month. And most people don't do that. Most people have no idea how much money is going out.
And most people think if they make more money, they'll solve the problem, but they're structurally screwed up. I mean, their income and expenses and debt and all that is so screwed up that making more money just makes it worse. Like, and we're talking to Tom Wheelwright when we were in Brazil a couple of weeks ago. This woman comes up to him and says, I bought 5 properties in Florida. They're all losing money.
Yeah. Should I refinance?
Oh, my goodness.
I started laughing. I'm like, oh my
goodness.
gosh. That's somebody who really doesn't understand money.
Hey, Clayton, that makes sense? I'm losing money, so should I borrow more money?
Right. Right, exactly. Let me just keep adding to that. When we came up with the freedom number cheat sheet, we give it away for free on my website, and it's 3 pages, and it literally, the emails that I've gotten from people that go through it, they'll say, I've never really had a handle on my expenses until I actually sat down and went through the cheat sheet and realized that we're paying for Hulu, we're paying for this Netflix thing. We didn't know we were even paying for this thing. We add it all up. And then when you look at your expenses, as you guys teach, and then how can we reverse engineer that? How much passive income would we need in order to cover that every month? And I like to say that most people throw out, when you ask them how much money do you want to make, most people just throw out an arbitrary number. Like if I had a room, when I speak in front of a crowd of 300 people, how many people, and hands will raise just, I want $1 million. It's a total arbitrary, meaningless number. What if you could have all of your monthly expenses covered every month? That's financial freedom. Who cares about a random number that you just picked out of a hat? Know what your numbers actually are, and then get passive income to make sure that that's no paycheck, no market. All of those things are in place to protect you for the rest of your life.
So for those of you listening to this and haven't played the cash flow game, I think that's where you start. It's not for the cash flow game, but it's for the financial statement. And if you don't have a financial statement, no bank is going to touch you, especially today. I mean, they're getting really, really nasty today. And if you come in as a non-professional, they're always going to turn you down. Right, Kenny?
Yeah. The other thing, Clayton, I think what happens is a lot of people get hung up and say, well, I don't have the money to invest, so I'm not going to dedicate the time to figure this out. And that's the illusion as well, because you don't actually need money to get passive income.
But you have to have some education and experience.
You do. You have to have a lot. But
so that's why Kenny's books are the best.
You actually, all deals start in the mind, and people can figure this out. You don't need the money to create passive income.
Clayton, when you had that aha moment with your wife Natalie, and trying to figure out how are you couldn't even pay the mortgage. So you obviously, you had a lot of expenses.
Right.
And
Yeah, we had a lot of, in New Jersey, right? So
Hey, I'm a Jersey girl. I'm a Jersey girl.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you have to pay the mafia off to live there.
Property taxes like crazy, a lot of expenses with the schools, or outside of Manhattan, so not a cheap area, and everyone moving to North Carolina or Texas or wherever the heck they were going, and so figuring out all of those expenses is so true. And Ken, to your point, okay, maybe you can't yet, or you don't think you know how yet to invest in real estate to create passive income, or some other method of creating passive income, right? Not just real estate, but you have to get a handle on that. And there's a great saying about, those who nurture and take care of money, those people who take care of money, then money takes care of you, and it starts to flow to you in really extraordinary ways. And Edwene Gaines wrote an amazing book, The 4 Spiritual Laws of Prosperity, and I would encourage all of you to read it. She's an amazing, feisty old lady, and one of the 4 spiritual laws will make you the most uncomfortable. And I don't know which one it'll be, but once you start going through the book, you'll know which one is making it difficult for you. And for me, it was tithing, because I grew up with all of these negative associations with money, and I felt like I had to hold on to money. And she makes the point in the book that those that, not tithing in the biblical sense necessarily, but tithing those who bring you spiritual sustenance. Like it could be the waitress that day, who you're having a terrible day, and the waitress just spends an extra few minutes perking you up and making you happy and laughing. You leave that person an enormous tip, right? The people that bring you spiritual sustenance. And so I started just giving money away when I didn't really have it in those dark days, and realizing that let money just flow through you, then abundance starts to come into your life in ways you never expected. And it's almost like watching. You start doing it. You literally start doing it. Mark it on your calendar. Once you start not being selfish with money and letting it flow through you, and you're going to be amazed at the phone calls you'll suddenly start receiving, the money that will start showing up in your life. And I know you could say, oh, it's easy for a Fox News anchor to say all this. Hogwash. People with no money can do it. People, if you have $1, give 10 cents of it away, and it's going to start to come back in ways you never expected.
Amen, brother. Amen. Kim, did we do that?
We did that. We did that when we were starting out. We
had nothing. We gave it away. We took 30% off the top of every dollar bill that came in, and this was when we had less coming in than going out. And of that 30%, 10% went into a tithing or charity account. This was back in the early days of the 80s.
Wow.
Yeah.
See, right there. I love it.
And it's, in the cash flow game, we have charity, and you get a benefit in there. But it's really amazing. I always say, if you want a punch in the mouth, throw a punch. You want a smile, give a smile. It's the same with money. If you want money, give money. People say, well, I'm giving my time. Well, then you have too much time on your hands. So give what you want, and that's money, and you'll get more money. So what kind of properties are you investing in, Clayton?
So I go back to one of the things I suffer from, guys, is shiny object syndrome. And so
that sounds
I have
good.
a tendency, when people bring me all sorts of different strategies. Hey, are you going to invest in mobile homes? Are you going to invest in billboards? What about hot air balloons? And all of these different things. So for me, those first 2 properties in my aha moment were single families. They were 3-bedroom, 1-bath. They were in the Midwest, blue-collar, hardworking neighborhoods where they didn't lose their jobs during the recession. Not a lot
That's
of moving
important.
parts. Yeah, very important.
Jobs.
Even in 2008, 2009, they were still working at the local hospital. They were still working at the local, distribution center, the FedEx distribution hub. Guess what? Packages still need to be delivered. People need to be taken care of by the nurses at the hospital. They did not lose their jobs. And so those are the houses I invest in. They have very few moving parts. My tenants provide their own appliances. I don't do any of that. And those were the 2 properties I started with, and I said, why am I going to change strategies now? So
how much were they?
I think I bought it for I overpaid. I think I paid like $26,000 for it and put about $20,000 in rehab into it at the time. I over-upgraded. I did some additional things I wouldn't have done. I added some extra bells and whistles that were totally unnecessary. You learn. You got to make mistakes. And so that's what I still do to this day. That's the bulk of my portfolio. That's what we do at Morris Invest. And so it's those same properties, the same strategy. I know what's gotten me here, and I'm going to continue to focus on that.
Congratulations. Any comments, Kenny, on that?
Well, I think he's right. I think what happens is people
Chase.
They chase all kinds of things. Generally, most properties, my experience has been that come through fully listed and brokered up are usually not the best deals. They're the ones that aren't necessarily on the market.
What Kenny and I say, or Kim and I say, is that if it's a nice brochure, it's a bad deal.
Yeah, we say the bigger the brochure, the worse the deal.
Yeah. I mean, I spent a lot. I mean, my team, my acquisitions team, you wouldn't want to. You'd have to wear, a gas mask to walk through the houses I buy. I want to buy them, the uglier the better. You're not going to find these with a nice brochure at all. And that's why I've got a great team that will go in and we do what we do and rip them apart.
It's the bulk of the market. That's where everybody lives.
Yeah,
literally, it's where.
That now?
Well, what he's investing in is really where
workforce housing.
Yeah, it's where everybody is, and it's not the high glossy stuff.
White working class.
The majority of the renters and the people are living in these kinds of homes. And what they need are good landlords like Clayton. They do.
So
Well,
Ken,
it's
tell about your first deal first. Everybody understands.
Oh, my first deal was a little 2-bedroom, 1-bath in a little area outside of Portland, Oregon, and hardworking people, and it was $45,000, 2-bedroom, 1-bath. Very similar formula. But one thing that Kenny, Robert, and I do and don't do is we don't go to the high end. We don't buy the high-end apartment buildings. And I still remember the one, Kenny, in Texas where we walk in and there's the toilet is sitting in the living room and 2/3 of the property has been burned down by the previous owner.
And Clayton, what they did also, they opened up all the walls. The landlord did this. He opened all the walls and took all the electrical wiring out to sell it as scrap. I'm going, geez, that's property management.
And all Kenny could say is, "Oh, I smell so much opportunity here."
Yeah, it had a flood, it had a fire. It was 680 units, so it was a big project.
But to what you said, Clayton, next door to it was huge insurance company, plus a hospital with full-time employment, right?
Yeah, it was right next to USAA, and it's in San Antonio. And that's right. You're buying in a neighborhood, and you're
buying where there's jobs.
You're improving the neighborhood, and you're buying where jobs are.
So, Clayton, thank you very much. I really appreciate your most importantly, congratulations for helping other people and teaching and being a great team player with all of us on this, and doing our best to straighten out the finances of this country. So thank you for that.
Much love to you guys, and you guys are true heroes to me. So it's truly an honor.
Congratulations, Clayton.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Take care, Clayton.
So much.
Out of the rat race and on to life.
Hooray.
So we come back. Going to the most important part of our program, or more popular part of our program, is called Ask Robert, and Ken will stick around and answer any questions you have.
You're listening to the Rich Dad Radio Show with Robert Kiyosaki.
Do you own an LLC or LP? Are you aware of the new rules? The IRS has mandated new audit rules that require every LLC operating agreement and LP limited partnership agreement be amended. This dramatic requirement has never before been experienced, and changes must be made by December 31st. Corporate Direct, owned by Rich Dad advisor Garrett Sutton, can guide you through these new rules. Call 800-600-1760. That's 800-600-1760. Or visit corporatedirect.com. Contact Corporate Direct today to stay in IRS compliance.
Robert Kiyosaki's Rich Dad Advisors have a great gift for you. Visit richdadadvisors.com and receive 5 free reports on business and investing success. 5 free reports that can help you right now. And while there, check out the Author's Choice audio series. Audio is a great way to learn. And for as little as 99 cents, you can download key chapters from all the Rich Dad Advisor books. You can listen to The Myths and Magic of Real Estate Investing, 7 Steps to Limited Liability, The 4 Pillars of Investing, Team Code of Honor, or The Psychology of Debt, among other great audios. For pennies, you can power up your skills for getting out of the rat race. So please visit richdadadvisors.com for your 5 free reports and your powerful and affordable audio chapters. That's richdadadvisors.com for great information that can help you right now.
Log on to richdadradio.com while you listen. Now back to Robert Kiyosaki.
Welcome back, Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Radio Show. Good news and bad news about money. I want to thank Clayton Morris, former weekend anchor for Fox and Friends, former anchor, because he got out of the rat race, and he's now a real estate investor and founder of Morris Invest. But like he's a kindred soul because he believes in teaching, because we're in a financial crisis today. I'm in a big one, huge one. And all those people with a steady job and saving money and trying to get out of debt and a 401k, I will pray for you tonight. Because when this baby comes down, it's going to be a bad one. Clayton was courageous enough to talk about what it's like to get to the end of the line, and that's when you find out what you're made of. And so he had a glamorous life and all this on television. He talks about he can't even afford to buy a cup of coffee. And Ken McElroy, Rich Dad Advisor, he's been there. Kim and I have been there, and I think that's what most people are terrified, the end of the line. And then you better figure out what you're made of at that moment. So that's why I thank Clayton and our talk today. And when I met Kim, I came to the end of the line. I said, I can't do this anymore. It was fun. It was really a lot of fun. Sex, drugs, rock and roll. But it's time to get on with my life. And so for all of you, maybe time for you to get to the end of the line and get on with your life and smell reality and face it and find out if you have it or not. Once again, you can listen to the Rich Dad Radio Show on your time and your schedule on iTunes and Android. And all of our programs are archived at richdadradio.com. We archive them so you can listen to them again, so you learn again, and because repetition is how we learn best. But more importantly, you can share this program with friends, family, and business partners. Because if we're correct, we're coming to the end of the line on one of the biggest economic boom, BS boom in history, called printed money. So be very careful right now, and that's why the Rich Dad Radio Show exists. You can submit your questions to Ask Robert at richdadradio.com, and Ken McElroy has stayed with us. So first question, Melissa.
So our first question today comes from Elisa in New York. Favorite book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Her question is this: how do you know which real estate is a good investment? Well,
All of us have that question constantly. And a lot of people don't like my answer. And I said, why don't you take a real estate course? If you really don't know what you're doing, there's a lot of, there's good and bad real estate courses, but that's where you start. At least that's where I started. And I have never lost money in real estate. Yet I know people with no real experience, they jump in and they get into real estate and they take a hammering. And the one reason real estate is risky is because there's no liquidity in it. In other words, you make a mistake, you're stuck with that baby. You're going down with the ship. Whereas you buy a stupid mutual fund and you make a mistake, you can sell it immediately. So the key is liquidity. So the less liquid an investment, i.e. real estate, take classes. Take classes. Kenny McElroy got his education working in real estate. Is that correct?
Yeah, I've taken tons and tons of classes, however, all along. I still do.
Yeah. It's part of education. I don't know why people think they're Donald Trump reincarnated or something.
Well, I think they want the answer, and then they go do it, and that's really not the right thing to do. To really the truth about real estate is you got to look for where the need is first.
But there's so many moving parts to it.
There's a lot.
And like we have some friends who are stock guys, and now they realize stocks are sucking. They just go buy real estate. Well, that could be the worst advice because of liquidity. You can't get out. You make a bad decision. So Rich Dad Education, Rich Dad Coaching offers courses on real estate. There's everybody out there teaching how to flip property, which is we don't do because the tax advantages of flipping are really higher risk for low tax advantages. But you've got to start your education. Look, it takes no intelligence to save money.
And I think what happens...
It takes no intelligence to save money. It takes no intelligence to use a credit card. And it takes no intelligence to invest in the stock market. But real estate is a different Megillah, right?
Yeah, actually, that's what I was going to say. Is I think people put real estate and stocks in the same category. And really, real estate is a business. You have to understand it. You have to understand income, expenses, and there's so many. It's very complex.
And the reason
stock is not.
Yeah, that's why I love your books, Kenny. ABCs of Real Estate Investment is how you find the deal. But the biggest one is the management of the deal because it is a business.
Yeah. You don't have to manage a stock. I mean, it's very easy. It's like buying anything at any store. That's how stocks are. Now, real estate is not like that. You can buy it that way, but then you have to manage it and you have to produce after that.
Yeah, real estate's like buying a puppy. Your problems begin after you buy
That's
it.
the truth. Yeah,
You know?
there's a lot to it.
Well, there's also we get a lot of questions about, well, I live in London and I'm thinking of investing in Florida. Very much like a stock. They're just going to blindly turn their money over to have somebody else manage it, run it, and they have no education. They don't know what they're investing in, but it sounds like a good deal.
Well, I think why that is, Kim, is there's a lot of these gurus out there that try to make it look like that. They say they're trying to raise capital over the internet, and they're trying to get people to invest in spots that they don't know anything about. It's such a bad idea.
And Kenny will tell you, and we've said it all along, if somebody's trying to sell it to you, it's probably a bad deal, right? I mean, it's probably bad. The prettier the brochure,
The worse the deal. Yeah.
and it's all these guys, flip this house and flip that thing and all that. That's not what we do. What Clayton says. Now, Clayton bought in the Midwest because he lives in New Jersey. I personally would not do that because the Midwest is too far away from New Jersey,
But it was a very calculated, strategic move. Is the point?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm
had a
sure
plan.
And
he's
he's
done
been
a
there, and
lot
he's
of
been out
reasons
there.
why he's
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
And I think that is the point. Real estate's a very local business, and so, as you drive down the road, you know what's good on the left and what's good on the right, and what if you're going into a bad area and good area, and that's how it is.
When Kim started, she could walk to her first investment. And our best investment of all, we can still walk to.
You can still walk
And
to
it
it
doesn't
today.
work if there's nobody to rent it. That's the point. Everybody runs out to the edge of town because it's cheap.
Yeah,
And then they
yeah.
can't figure out why.
Nobody
it's
lives here.
vacant. Yeah, nobody. And then real estate's a bad deal.
Yeah.
They're idiots for even.
And they can't get out of it.
Correct.
And my first deal, the reason I know that 1 hour thing is my first property was on Maui. And Maui, Hawaii is beautiful. The trouble is when something went wrong, I had to take a whole day off of work to catch a plane, rent a car, drive to the property, deal with some idiot person who's pissed off at me, or then I had to come back and try to get back to work. And it was a whole day. It cost me more money than I could ever make from the property. So, sports fans, this is about education. We're not telling you to buy anything, but you have to study with real estate for one major reason. It's not liquid. You can't get out quickly. That's the problem if you make a mistake. And tell them the story of Tom Wheelwright again in Brazil. That woman.
Tom Wheelwright's our
lives in
rich dad
Brazil.
advisor
The
on
woman-
taxes.
This is very similar. A woman she lived out of the country. She bought some property in Florida, and she was basically hemorrhaging cash, or what they weren't cash flowing, which is the number one thing that we talk about.
None of the properties were cash flowing.
Yeah, Rich Dad Poor Dad, if that is your favorite book, which you said it was, that's basically what it says. It says, properties should cash flow.
Like in cash flow out as well as cash flow in.
Right. So what happened in that one is that she's hemorrhaging on all 5 properties.
But she made bad decisions.
Yeah, and the question to Tom, which was ridiculous. I mean, it's good that you ask questions, but is maybe I can just refinance. I'm like,
Add more debt.
yeah, which that is
gosh.
unbelievable. That
Once
she would
again-
even say that.
Once again, ladies and gentlemen, take a course, invest 2 or 3 days, and study. Kent looks at 1,000 deals every year, right?
Yeah, every year, almost 1,000.
And that's what it takes. So I want to thank you for your questions. You can submit your questions to AskRobert@richdadradio.com. Much thanks to Clayton Morris. Congratulations for being out of the rat race. And thank you all for listening.